Massacre at the Graveyard in Cameroon, West Central Africa.
After an hour of small talk and farewell wishes to the dead and crying at the graveside, the lookout party of 5 young men, who were stationed by a hill further down the road, 3 on top of the hill and 2 at the foot of the hill, saw the intruders coming in the distance. Those lookout young men were not mistaken. So no, they were not about to cry wolf. This was the real thing. The enslavers were coming in with their group of slave catchers, with guns, foot chains, waist chains, hand chains, dogs and other newfangled gadgets to hold the prisoners the way they want them to be held. They were now drawing closer, ever closer, while some of the enslavers rode on horses and some on mules, and the slave trackers and catchers came in on foot, walking on the forward position. Astonished and amazed, looking at the sea of people, they realized that although they have had many successful raids in the past, today was a big mistake for the team. They were limited, very limited in their scope to catch these fishes from this ocean of people, but it was a little too late.
Tell us where you are watching from, like and share, smash the like button, squeeze the bell, and press the all button. We appreciate your indulgence, watch until the end, and give this story a thumbs up so that we can produce more stories like this one for you.
Those ancient plunderers we know as slave merchants were determined to rid the African continent of its people through enslavement and death. And with the added newfangled manacles of foot and waist chains, the prisoners would put up less resistance and attempted escapes. But the slave merchants failed to realize that for all men, life was short. They too will live for a while, and then they too will die. Chief Okefi was not a young warrior chief anymore, but age had brought something else with him, which is patience and wisdom, the kind of knowledge that only wise warriors like this chief is known for, and that came from many battles with various enemy tribes in the African villages. The intruders' guns shone bright and dazzling in the afternoon sunlight, their chains rattled loosely on their shoulders, and their dogs striding beside their handlers, ready to do some damage when ordered to do so. The African slave catchers and betrayers walked briskly in front of the group, while looking from side to side of the tracked road to identify any surprise attacks from the villagers and their cohorts. Now, this group of slave merchants were experienced traders who had made several trips to Africa to engage in the trade, and the catchers were well experienced in the trade as well. But something was about to happen, something extraordinary that would change the paradigm shift in the lives of the exploiters and also the lives of the villagers. Many of these men, doctors, sailors, and other ship personnel, were the same ones who just weeks ago escaped the death-defying blows from the pirates on the high seas, except for the ship's captain and his 3 assistants who stayed back at the ship docks. Lucky for them. Now, although this was a cornering situation that the village funeral attendees found themselves in, but unbeknown to most of them, a path to their defense was already brewing in the defensive percolator. Brave men with poison-tipped arrows, stone hammers, iron-tipped spears, and a strong determination to give their lives in the cause of defending their people, village, and country, were ready and waiting in the winds. The approaching enemy's imminent presence hung over the funeral attendees like a dark cloud before a storm. The sun would be setting over the funeral soon, as the kidnappers moved closer to the great crowd of mourners and singers who were feeling the pain, loss, and sorrowful hearts for the deceased. And that made them angrier to see that these slavers were about to disrespect the funeral of their dearly beloved nurse. Chief Okefi was the security chief of the 5 villages in the community, but he was also the village chief of one of the 5 villages as well. He had set the battle in the ready just in case there was trouble in the neighborhood. He had instructed the young men about the watch-out arrangements, how many to stay on the hill and at the bottom of the hill. Those at the foot of the hill, after getting the signal from those on the hill, would run to the chief, make their report, and then mix in with the crowd. And so, with hand signal, the young men on the hill warned those at the foot of the hill, and those 2 ran as swiftly as frightened rabbits upon a rugged mountain and warned the village security chief that trouble was brewing, the slave merchants were coming, while the slave catchers and slave practitioners were casting their dark shadows over the celebration of life for a loved one. Indeed, the shadows of the approaching slave catchers and slave trading merchants hung heavily over the burial attendees like darkness before a storm. Indeed, the older-aged security chief moved with the grace and agility of a younger man. As a warrior and a village chief for many years, he knew that overconfident enemies like the slave merchants coming into his domain would make mistakes. But yet, the evil merchants moved forward with precise grace and determination, riding upon their horses like Absalom, King David's son back in the Bible days, who met his death from an arrow to his heart after his hair got tangled up into the branches of a low-lying tree. After the two young men informed the chief about the approaching and impending danger, Chief Okefi advised everyone to keep calm and act normally. But some weak-minded attendees left and stood afar off on the hillside. Those invaders and slave merchants were used to easy victory, so they will not know what hit them when they come into the circle of fire, the chief advised the crowd. Then the security chief swallowed the sobering, muffled thought and dwelt for a while upon another thought, and people get predictable when they think they have the advantage. The chief's group of warriors call him Ghost because of his swift movements and crafty planning for any situation. And still the invaders moved and advanced with confidence and joy in the thought that with the many guns and dogs, this mission would be easily achieved, and many prisoners would be seen carted off to the holding area at the port of embarkation. But the chief wanted the slave merchants to come very close and get comfortable and think that they have the advantage. So now, the invaders thought they were going to raid an easy target of funeral attendees, but their goose will be cooked. There was not going to be any easy picking that day for them. But alas, the invaders did not realize that they should not have come into a funeral territory without having an informer or two in the throng of attendees. That was one of their big mistakes. The outlookers on the hill had their cow and ram's horns, but were cautious about alerting the incoming unwelcomed, uninvited, and unwanted guests if the horns were blown, and so after the vocal warning, many people scattered for safety, but the warriors and other men drew close to their weapons of war, even though they might be ancient, offensive, and defensive tools. Many dogs that came to the funeral with their owners started barking at this time. Those native men who were standing as innocent villagers removed and retrieved their weapons from the grassy covering that hid the bows and arrows and fired into their selected targets. And the warriors swiftly executed their task with their bows and arrows with fluid grace and precision. And what seems to the invaders like a victory zone to be celebrated soon now appears to be a fight for survival. But will they survive? But the chief also knew that desperate men are unpredictable. The chief was sure that these merchants had to learn that not all fights are won by guns, chains, and dogs, but by willpower and fighting skills, by using whatever is available to the fighter, whether it is bow and poison arrow, or stone axe, or common tools that are used in the villager's defense. The fierce fight would determine the survival between the slave merchants and the funeral attending villagers when the fight subsided. It was clear like crystal that the 50 who came to plunder and rape the burial party would not see the light of day again, never see the sail of their ship again, never see the doctor's medical instruments again, or, in the case of the African slave merchants' helpers, they would never again see their huts, farms, and fields, and their families and young offsprings again. I am sure that the slave traders will think twice before venturing into these villages again, because sometimes the best deterrent to the slavers are the unknown, so now others will think twice about coming to this region or these villages to hunt, or to call these villages their happy slave hunting ground. These villagers had been attacked by other vicious invading tribes before, and were always on high alert, and were known for their adventurous and resilient preparedness for the worst-case scenario. And so, they moved toward the uninvited guest with practiced and precise efficiency, unaffected by the thought of being killed in the defensive or the offensive posture. The slave trade was the merchants' weakness, and certainly, indeed, it would be their downfall as well. The hidden group of archers shot the 12 dogs with poisoned arrows. The dying dogs were making sounds with a series of short, high-pitched whimpers. The surprised intruders did not have time to think or catch their breath, much more to start firing on the natives, before many were shot with poisoned arrow. After catching their breath and their surprise waned, many villager warriors bravely rushed into the group of intruders, and many let out a series of war cry, and with their homemade knives and sharp stone clubs and spears were shot and killed by the men with guns. Poisonous arrows were seen flying into their targets and killing many instantly. 3 tried to ride away with frantic speed by having their horses jump over many graves on the north side of the graveyard. However, their retreat paths were blocked by many native warriors with an overwhelming force that could not be reckoned with, and they died, and their horses and guns taken away. This group of enslavers and slave catchers had guns, dogs, machetes, knives, swords, ropes, and chains, but they didn't realize that their eyes would be so dazzled and tantalizingly overwhelmed by this great and grand crowd of native mourners without modern weapons of war. After the fierce fighting was over, they counted 5 villagers dead, including one of the chief's son, who had thrown himself into the fray with a long battle spear. He killed 5 intruders, but he was brutally shot thereafter. Even though the slave catchers and slave traders were not masters of psychological warfare, like the biblical Assyrians, they were determined, steadfast, and organized in their pursuit of their intended goals, which was to capture and imprison as many African natives as possible to be sold for a profit as slaves in lands unknown to the victims. The African village sunlight was just standing in the gap, getting ready to start its going down activities and showing off its beauty and splendor, while painting the sky in beautiful colors of purple and golden brightness as it slowly cruised overhead toward the sunset in the western sky. Many who had run away at the beginning and were standing afar off and saw the defensive posture of the fighters ran back to the battle to give a helping hand. The poisoned sap that is used on the tips of arrows is derived from various trees in the forest of Africa. And if my memory serves me correctly, I can think of a few special trees, the Euphorbia ingens, also known as the candelabra tree. This milky sap can be very poisonous to the touch of the unprotected hands if there is a cut or a bruise. The Bufandistica, also known as gifbol or kopsierblom, is another plant that produces a slow-acting poison. The Pachypodium lealii, also known as the bottle tree or bottle boom, the sap is also used on arrows as poison. The tamboti is another deadly sap that can neutralize humans and animals. Also, the Acocanthera skimperi, the bark, wood, and roots of this plant, are also used to make arrow poison. The fruit is edible when ripe, but unripe fruits are highly toxic.
The courage of the villagers
Inflicted serious damage to most of the intruders, except 3, who were captured and tied up, and then marched off into the forest to be tied up as prey for wild animals, or be killed and be fed to wild animals, and their guns taken away. Those slave merchants thought they knew all the tricks in the Black Book of kidnapping and village warfare, and now the villagers had gotten several guns and cartridges and other weapons of war to be used again when needed. Sometimes, the end of life for those slave merchants justifies the beginning of a new chapter in the lives of those villagers. Today should have been a good catch for the slave traders, but instead, today would be a marvelous day for the lions, wild dogs, and hyenas to feast on human carcasses. 50 enslavers, including catchers and trackers with guns, chains, and dogs, will be placed in another group for the burn fire heap, to be consumed by the African bushfire with its burning inferno. Whether they are dead or wounded, knives and swords would be given to the army of volunteer warriors after teaching them the art of marksmanship. Now, The door of no return refers to a symbolic doorway located at various slave trading forts along the West African coast. The most notably one was at Cape Coast Castle in Ghana, representing the last point where enslaved Africans would walk through before being forced onto ships to be transported to the Americas, the Caribbean, Mexico, Brazil, and Jamaica, signifying that they would never return to their homeland again. However, it also serves as a powerful memorial to the transatlantic slave trade. Actually, to the prisoners, this visible arch or doorway serves as an important reminder of the brutality of the trade enterprise, the impact it had on the Africans and the African villages, and the brutality of the slave trade, along with the reminder of the finality of the journey for enslaved Africans, as they were unlikely to ever see their homeland again after passing through this door into hell, as it were.